Charlotte Whitmore did not cry. She did not scream. She did not beg. She simply folded the document her husband had signed, the one that erased her name from everything she had quietly built for 11 years, and placed it gently on the oak table where she had once served him his morning coffee. Then she picked up her worn leather journal, smoothed her dress, and walked to the door. Outside in the pale gold of a Virginia summer morning, 93 people were already waiting. If this story moves you, subscribe, stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Charlotte's story travels Virginia. Summer, 1817. The heat came early that year. By the time the sun climbed above the tree line east of Whitmore Estate, the air already carried that thick, breathless weight that settles over the Shenandoah Valley in July, the kind of heat that makes men slow and makes the land shimmer like a mirage at the edges. But inside the great house, nobody was slow. Nobody was still. They were moving. All of them. Martha Collins, 62 years old, head housekeeper, a woman who had served the Whitmore family since before Nathaniel Whitmore was born, stood in the center of the kitchen and watched her girls fold their aprons with steady, deliberate hands. Not rushed. Not panicked. Decided. Martha. One of the younger kitchen girls, Abigail, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Are we truly doing this?" Martha did not hesitate. "We are." "But where will we go?" Martha crossed the kitchen, placed both hands on the girl's shoulders, and looked her square in the face. "Wherever she goes," she said quietly. "That's where we go." Abigail swallowed hard and nodded. She picked up her apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. Outside in the stable yard, Thomas Briggs, head groundskeeper, 44 years old, built like an oak tree, and just as immovable, was organizing the men. There were 31 of them. Stable workers, field hands, fence builders, gardeners who had watched Charlotte Whitmore walk the grounds at dawn every morning for 11 years, learning the name of every tree she passed. Thomas did not give a speech. He simply said, "You know what she did for us in the winter of 14. Every man was quiet. Every man remembered. You know what she did for Harlan's family when the flood took the South Field." More silence. "You know what she did for every single one of you when she didn't have to do anything at all." Thomas picked up his tools. "I'm not telling any man here what to do, but I know where I stand." He walked toward the main road. One by one, the men followed. Inside the mansion, Nathaniel Whitmore was still in his study when the sound reached him. It was not a loud sound. That was what made it wrong. It was the sound of nothing. No breakfast dishes, no morning fire being laid in the dining room, no quiet footsteps in the hall outside his door, no hum of the household beginning its day. Only silence. The kind of silence that does not feel like peace. The kind that feels like something has been removed. Nathaniel set down his coffee, still warm, brought to him an hour ago by a housemaid who had not. He now realized, returned, and frowned at the window. The study overlooked the south lawn. The south lawn was full of people, his people, carrying their belongings. Nathaniel stood up so fast his chair scraped back hard against the floorboards. He found Charlotte in the front hall. She was standing near the door wearing a plain blue dress, not one of the fine ones he had purchased from Richmond, and carrying only her leather journal pressed against her chest with both hands. She looked calm. That was the thing that struck him first. Not upset, not triumphant, not performing anything at all. She simply looked like a woman who had made her decision and was at peace with it. "Charlotte." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "What in God's name is happening?" She looked at him, just looked at him. "I received your document this morning, Nathaniel." He straightened. "That document is a matter of estate management. It does not concern." "It concerns me entirely," she said, quietly, without raising her voice even a fraction. "It removes my name from every account I have managed, every contract I have maintained, every agreement I have built. It transfers all household authority to Miss Harrington effective immediately." A pause. "I believe it concerns me." Nathaniel moved toward the window beside the door, looked out at the lawn, then turned back. "I did not ask them to leave," he said carefully. "No." Charlotte agreed. "You didn't." Then call them back. She tilted her head very slightly, just enough for him to see something shift behind her eyes. Not cruelty, not satisfaction. Something quieter and more devastating than either. I cannot call back something that was never mine to command, she said. She opened the front door. Summer heat rolled in from outside, and she walked out of his house. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of Whitmore Estate for a long moment. He watched Charlotte cross the front drive. He watched Martha Collins fall into step beside her, the old woman who had bounced him on her knee when he was 4 years old, who had sat with his mother through fever and storm, who had run this house like a quiet general for 35 years. Martha did not look back. He watched Thomas Briggs and his 31 men. He watched the kitchen women. He watched the laundry girls, the dairy workers, the men who managed the smokehouse and the granary, 93 people, walking away, in the dead silence of a Virginia summer morning. Not running, not angry, simply gone. Nathaniel Whitmore, wealthiest landowner in the county. A man who had never once questioned that his name alone commanded loyalty, stood on the steps of his own estate and felt for the first time in his adult life something he did not have a word for. Not rage, not confusion. Something colder. Something closer to the feeling of reaching for something that has always been there and finding only empty air. I went back inside. He poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen pitcher the first time he had poured his own water in 11 years, and stood at the kitchen counter and tried to understand what had just happened. The document. He had signed it yesterday evening in Evelyn Harrington's company, in his own study with a glass of good brandy at his elbow, and Evelyn's voice in his ear, smooth and reasonable and persuasive as she always was. Nathaniel, a man of your position, deserves an estate run with true efficiency. Charlotte is sweet, she is, but she is a farmer's daughter, managing a property of this magnitude. She is doing her best, but darling, her best is simply not enough anymore. You need someone with social standing. Someone who understands what Whitmore Estate must become. He had listened. He had poured another glass. He had signed. It had seemed in that moment so simple. One document. One decision. A matter of practical management, nothing more. He had not imagined 93 people walking out the front gate before breakfast. Nathaniel forced himself to move. He went to the dining room, empty, no table set, no fire laid, no smell of coffee or bread from the kitchen. He went to the parlor, no fresh flowers in the vase. Charlotte kept filled every morning from the garden. No arrangement of chairs that somehow always made the room feel welcoming rather than formal. He walked the house room by room. Every room felt the same. Still, hollow, like a body without breath. He came at last to Charlotte's sitting room, the small room off the east wing that she had claimed as her own place, where she kept her account books and her correspondence, and the small potted herbs she grew on the windowsill, because she had once told him she liked to know something was growing even in winter. The herbs were still there. She had left them behind. Nathaniel stood and looked at them for a long moment. Then he opened the small writing desk. The account books were there. He pulled them out, 1, 2, 3, 4 volumes, each one covered in Charlotte's careful hand. He opened the first one. He began to read. 2 hours later, he was still reading. His water glass was empty. He had not moved from the chair. The accounts went back 11 years to the year they married, to the year she had arrived at Whitmore Estate as his wife, a quiet 20-year-old woman from a farming family that everyone in his social circle had considered beneath him. He remembered their wedding. He remembered his mother's friends whispering behind their fans. Such a plain choice for a man of his position. He could have married into the Harrington family or the Caldwells. She is a sweet girl, I suppose. But hardly. He had never paid their whispering much attention. He had liked Charlotte. She was sensible and calm, and did not bore him with endless social drama the way some of the women in his circle did. He had assumed that was sufficient. He had not paid much attention beyond that. He was paying attention now. The accounts told a story he had never been told, or rather a story he had been told quietly, repeatedly, in ways he had not listened to. Winter of 1814. The year of the late freeze. Nathaniel had been in Richmond for 6 weeks, managing a land dispute with his cousin that had ultimately settled in his favor, a satisfying outcome that had occupied most of his attention that season. Back at Whitmore Estate. According to these pages, the temperature had dropped in February to levels nobody anticipated. 3 of the tenant families in the South Field had lost their root cellars. Their winter stores were gone. Charlotte had opened the estate granary, not a little, not symbolically. She had fed 4 families through 8 weeks of winter out of the Whitmore stores, and she had recorded every single bushel, careful, accountable, precise, and she had covered the difference herself from her own personal household allowance so that the estate accounts would not show a deficit when Nathaniel reviewed them. She had not told him. She had known he would have questions. She had not wanted the families to feel they owed the estate, rather than that the estate had simply done the right thing. Nathaniel turned the page. Summer of 1815. The flood. He remembered hearing about it. The Southfield drainage had failed after 3 weeks of hard rain, and a significant section of the tenant farms had been underwater for nearly a fortnight. He had sent a letter from Richmond, where he was again dealing with investments, expressing concern and confidence that things would be handled. Things had been handled. He had never asked exactly how. According to these pages, Charlotte had ridden out with Thomas Briggs every day for 14 days. She had personally assessed which crops could be saved. She had negotiated with 2 neighboring estates for emergency grain loans at rates more favorable than the county bank would have offered, using her own family connections, her father's old friendships, the goodwill she had cultivated quietly over 11 years of paying attention to people. She had arranged temporary housing for the Harlan family when their main structure became unsafe, housing them in the east wing of the main house for 3 weeks, a decision that Nathaniel knew would have raised eyebrows in his social circle, a white landowner's wife opening the family home to tenant workers. Charlotte had not asked his permission. She had done what needed doing. She had written to him about it in a letter. Nathaniel could see the record of it here in her hand, wrote to N. June 12, and he could not for the life of him remember reading that letter. He turned another page. The accounts continued, year after year, quiet decisions, practical solutions, problems solved before they became crises, relationships maintained, workers kept on when the harvest was lean, medical costs covered from the household fund when families could not pay. A school arranged a school for God's sake for the children of the estate workers, which Charlotte had organized with the help of the local minister, and funded through careful management of the household budget, reducing costs in areas Nathaniel had never thought to examine. He had not known about the school. He had not known about most of this. He sat in Charlotte's sitting room in the summer heat, with her account books open on his lap, and felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. Ashamed. Not of anything dramatic. Not of cruelty or deliberate wrongdoing. Ashamed of the simplest, most ordinary failure a man could commit. He had not paid attention. He had walked through this estate every day for 11 years and seen the result of her work, the smoothly running household, the loyal workers, the community standing that made the Whitmore name respected in a way that went beyond mere wealth, and he had absorbed all of it as simply the natural order of things, as if it had simply happened, as if it required no effort, as if it required no one. He had looked at his estate and seen his name. He had never looked at his estate and seen hers. A knock at the front door broke the silence. Nathaniel set down the account books and went to answer it himself. He was not accustomed to answering his own door. The man on the steps was Edward Crane, county magistrate, an acquaintance of 20 years, a man whose expression of polite concern failed to fully conceal his curiosity. Nathaniel. He removed his hat. I came to call on Mrs. Whitmore. I have some correspondence for her regarding the charity account she manages for the county, the one for widows' assistance. A pause. Is she at home? She is not, Nathaniel said. Edward Crane's eyes moved briefly to the drive behind Nathaniel, the empty stable yard, the unusual quiet of an estate that was normally at this hour fully alive with activity. I see, Edward said carefully. Shall I leave the correspondence? Yes, thank you. Edward held out the envelope. Then, with the manner of a man who knows he is asking a question he has no business asking, but cannot quite stop himself. Is everything all right here, Nathaniel? Nathaniel took the envelope. "Everything is fine," he said. He closed the door. He stood in the empty hall with an envelope addressed to his wife. Correspondence relating to a charity account. He had not known she managed in a house where every servant had walked out before breakfast, beside a document he had signed without fully reading in a marriage he had apparently been present for in body, while being absent in every way that actually mattered. He set the envelope on the hall table. He went back to the sitting room. He opened the next account book. It was in the third volume dated 1816 that he found the letters. Not all of them. Only copies drafts kept in Charlotte's hand of correspondence she had sent him. Letters to Richmond. Letters to the Gentlemen's Club, where he sometimes stayed during long business trips. Letters forwarded through 2 different intermediaries to find him during the months when he traveled without clear schedule. He read the first one. "Nathaniel, I write with some concern regarding the South Granary repair. The contractor, Mr. Holt, has proposed terms I believe are unfavorable, and I would appreciate your guidance before I proceed. Please write when you are able." He had no memory of this letter. He read the second. "Nathaniel, I must inform you of a matter regarding the Harrington family's recent visit. Miss Evelyn Harrington spoke with me at some length about arrangements regarding the estate management. I confess I was unsettled by certain aspects of the conversation, and I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you directly at your earliest convenience." He had no memory of this letter either. He read the third, the fourth, the fifth, letter after letter. Some about practical estate matters, some about the servants. 3 of them, 3 written across 6 months, mentioning Evelyn Harrington. Growing in urgency, quietly, but unmistakably. Charlotte was not a dramatic woman. She did not use alarming language. But reading them now in sequence in the context of everything else in these account books, the concern in them was unmistakable. She had seen something. She had tried to tell him. And somehow these letters had never reached him, or had been set aside, or had arrived during weeks when he was occupied, and had been placed on a pile of correspondence he would get to eventually and had simply never gotten to. He did not know. He pressed both hands flat against the desk and stared at the pages. He did not know whether the letters had been intercepted. He did not know whether his own neglect had buried them. He only knew that his wife had tried to reach him repeatedly across months about practical matters, about matters of safety, about a woman she had reason to distrust, and he had been unreachable. Not because he was a cruel man, because he had simply never imagined that his attention was something she needed. Howe was still sitting there when the sound of hoofbeats on the drive pulled him back to the present. He went to the window. Evelyn Harrington was arriving. In her finest carriage. In a traveling dress the color of cream silk. With 2 of her own maids, and what appeared to be a considerable quantity of luggage. She had wasted no time. Nathaniel watched the carriage come to a stop in front of his house. He watched Evelyn step down, adjust her gloves, and look up at the front of the estate with an expression of unmistakable satisfaction. She had not asked whether he needed time. She had not written to confirm her arrival was welcome. She had simply come, as if the estate were already hers. Nathaniel stood at the window of Charlotte's sitting room, with Charlotte's account books in his hands, and Charlotte's drafts of unread letters on the desk beside him, and watched Evelyn Harrington look at his home with ownership in her eyes. And for the first time since he had picked up his pen the night before to sign a document, he had not adequately considered for the first time since he had listened to a voice that was smooth and reasonable and flattering and utterly, completely self-serving. Something shifted in his chest. Not guilt, not grief. Something harder, something colder, something that felt, if he was honest with himself, a great deal like the beginning of understanding what he had actually done. He set down the account books. He straightened his jacket, and he went to open the front door. Evelyn. She turned at the sound of his voice, and her expression shifted into the warm, gracious smile that he had until very recently found entirely convincing. "Nathaniel, darling, I came as quickly as I could. I assumed you would want help settling the transition." She looked past him at the open door, the empty hall visible beyond. "Where are all the servants I expected Martha to meet us?" "Martha is gone," Nathaniel said. Evelyn blinked. "Gone. All of them. 93 people walked out this morning, along with my wife." A pause. Something moved across Evelyn's face, quickly controlled, professionally concealed, but there a flicker of something that was not surprise. She had not expected this, but she had not been entirely unprepared for it either. "Well," she said, recovering smoothly, "that is certainly dramatic. But Nathaniel, you see, this is exactly what I mean. A woman who would use the servants as leverage against her own husband." "She didn't use them," Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet. Very quiet. The kind of quiet that Evelyn had not apparently heard from him before because she stopped. "She didn't ask them to leave," he continued. "Not one of them. I have been in this house for 3 hours, reading 11 years of account books, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, Charlotte Whitmore does not manipulate people. She serves them, consistently, without recognition, without complaint." He looked at Evelyn steadily. "That is why they left with her. Not because she commanded them, because they chose her." Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Nathaniel, I understand you are upset." "Tell me about the letters," he said. A beat, very brief, but there. "I don't know what—" "My wife wrote to me, multiple times, over a period of months, letters that mentioned you specifically." He kept his eyes on her face. "I did not receive those letters. Or I received them, and they were not brought to my attention in a timely manner. I am not yet certain which." A pause. "Were you in a position to influence that?" Evelyn's smile was still in place, but her eyes had changed. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are in a great deal of distress this morning, and perhaps not thinking entirely clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in some time," Nathaniel said. He stepped back from the doorway. "I think you should go home, Evelyn." She stared at him. "Nathaniel, go home, take your things. I will be in contact with your father regarding the business arrangements we discussed, which I now intend to revisit in their entirety." He held her gaze. "Good day." A long moment. Evelyn Harrington, who had calculated this situation with considerable precision, who had waited a very long time for this particular morning, stood on the front steps of Whitmore Estate, and understood in the silence of 93 absent people, and one husband reading account books alone, in a room that did not belong to her, that something had gone differently than she had planned. She descended the front steps. She got back into her carriage. She did not look back. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his estate and watched her go. The drive was empty when the carriage disappeared around the bend. The house behind him was empty. The lawn ahead of him was empty. The summer heat pressed down on everything relentless and indifferent. Nathaniel Whitmore, wealthiest man in the county, owner of a great estate, holder of a name that commanded respect from the Blue Ridge to the coast, stood alone on his own front steps in the middle of a Virginia July, and felt the full, undisguised weight of what he had built and what he had neglected, and what he had through carelessness and pride, and the simple failure to pay attention, very nearly destroyed. He went back inside. He sat down at the kitchen table, the one where Martha Collins had rolled pastry dough every morning of his entire life, and he put his head in his hands. He did not have a plan. He did not have a solution. He had 11 years of account books, 3 hours of silence, and the slowly forming understanding that the most important thing in his life had been quietly holding everything together while he looked in the opposite direction. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line at the edge of the estate, 93 people were walking beside a woman in a plain blue dress who was carrying a leather journal and had not once looked back. And Nathaniel Whitmore, for the first time in his life, was alone with the consequences of the things he had chosen not to see. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table until the candle burned down to nothing, and then he sat in the dark, and the dark did not offer him anything useful. By the time the first gray light of morning pressed through the windows, he had made a decision. Not a good decision, not a wise one, simply the only one available to a man who had no servants, no wife, no plan, and a rapidly growing sense that the situation was about to become considerably more complicated than one empty house. He needed to find Charlotte. He needed to find her before anyone else did, before the county started talking. Before the story of 93 people walking off Whitmore Estate spread through every parlor and general store between here and Richmond, before the version of events that Evelyn Harrington would undoubtedly begin circulating had time to take root in the minds of people who did not know Charlotte Whitmore the way her own household did. He saddled his own horse. That was the first practical consequence of having no stable hands, a task that took him considerably longer than it should have, and which left him with a new and unwelcome appreciation for the people who had performed it silently every morning of his adult life. He rode toward town. The road into Mill Haven was quiet in the early morning, the way Virginia roads always were before the heat set in. Birds loud in the trees, the smell of damp grass, the particular stillness that existed in that window between the end of night and the true beginning of day. Nathaniel had ridden this road 1,000 times. He had never once noticed how pleasant it was. He noticed now. He was noticing a great many things he had not noticed before. He reached the edge of town and pulled his horse to a slower pace, and that was when he saw the first sign that the night had already been busy. 2 women stood outside the dry goods store. It was not yet open, but they were standing there anyway, talking in the low, rapid manner of people sharing information they consider urgent. One of them glanced at Nathaniel as he passed. Her expression was not the expression of a woman looking at the wealthiest landowner in the county. It was the expression of a woman looking at a man whose business she already knew. She looked away. That was worse than staring. Nathaniel kept riding. He found Charlotte at the Reverend Hayes's house. He had guessed she might go there. The Reverend was the man who had helped her organize the school for the estate children 3 years ago. A fact Nathaniel had learned only yesterday afternoon from a set of account books in a room he had barely entered. The Reverend's wife, Eleanor, was a woman Charlotte had spoken of with quiet warmth on occasions Nathaniel had half listened to over supper. The Reverend answered the door himself. How was a tall man, spare and deliberate in his movements, with the kind of steady gaze that made people tell him things they had not planned to say out loud. He looked at Nathaniel for a moment. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "Reverend Hayes. I'm looking for my wife." "I know you are." The Reverend did not move from the doorway. "She is here. She is safe. She slept in the guest room, and she had a decent breakfast, which I suspect is more than you can say for yourself." A pause. "She did not ask me to turn you away, but she did not ask me to let you in either." "I need to speak with her." "I expect you do." The Reverend looked at him with the particular patience of a man accustomed to dealing with people who were in the process of understanding things they should have understood a long time ago. "The question, Mr. War, is whether you are here because you need something from her, or whether you are here because you have something to offer." Nathaniel opened his mouth, closed it. The Reverend waited. "I'm not sure I know the difference this morning," Nathaniel said finally, and it was the most honest thing he had said in a very long time. Something shifted slightly in the Reverend's expression. Not warmth exactly. Something adjacent to it. The recognition of a man encountering possibly for the first time the useful discomfort of genuine honesty. "Wait here," the Reverend said. He closed the door. Nathaniel stood on the front step in the early morning heat and waited, and the waiting was its own particular punishment. The kind of stillness that gives a man nothing to do but think about every choice that led him to this specific doorstep on this specific morning. The door opened again after several minutes. Eleanor Hayes stood in the doorway. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the direct manner of someone who did not own sufficient time to spend it on dishonesty. "She'll see you," Eleanor said. "In the parlor. I'll be in the kitchen. The door stays open." "Of course," Nathaniel said. "I'm telling you, Mr. Whitmore, not asking you." "Yes, ma'am," he said. Eleanor studied him for one more moment, apparently decided he was not going to cause any immediate trouble, and stepped aside. Charlotte was standing near the parlor window when he came in. She had changed into a different dress, simpler than what she usually wore at the estate, something borrowed probably from Eleanor Hayes, and she was holding a cup of tea in both hands, and she looked in the morning light coming through the Reverend's parlor window exactly like herself. Not diminished, not fragile. Not the woman he had half expected to find tearful, uncertain, waiting to be persuaded to come home. Simply Charlotte, looking at him with the calm, clear gaze of a woman who had made her decision and was not as yet interested in undoing it. "Nathaniel," she said. "Charlotte." He stopped in the middle of the room. He had prepared things to say during the ride into town. None of them seemed adequate now. "I spent the night reading your accounts." She was quiet. "All of them," he said. "The school, The winter of 14, the flood. The letters you sent that he stopped, started again. I don't know whether I didn't receive them, or whether I received them and didn't read them carefully enough. I genuinely don't know. And I understand that both answers are a failure. Charlotte set her cup down on the table beside her. Do you know what I thought, she said, when I read the document you signed? Tell me. I thought my first thought before the hurt, before anything else, was that I was not surprised. She said it without cruelty, without drama, simply as a statement of fact, and that simplicity made it land harder than an accusation would have. That is what troubled me most. Not that you had done it, that I was not surprised. Nathaniel said nothing. I have been watching you look through me for 3 years, Charlotte continued. Not at me, through me, as if I were part of the furniture of the estate, functional, expected, not requiring attention. She picked up her tea again, holding it this way people hold something warm when they need the steadiness of it. I wrote to you. I tried to talk to you. There was one evening. Do you remember last September after supper? I asked if we could speak about Evelyn Harrington's visits, and you told me you were tired and we would talk tomorrow. September. He remembered that evening. Vaguely. He had been dealing with a land survey dispute, and his mind had been elsewhere, and he had told her yes, he had told her tomorrow. We never talked tomorrow, Charlotte said. No, he said. We didn't. Nathaniel. She looked at him with something that was not anger and was not grief, but existed in the difficult space between them. What are you here to say to me? Say it plainly. He took a breath. I'm here to tell you that I was wrong. I'm here to tell you that I read what you built over 11 years in this county, and I had no idea. Not because you hid it from me, because I never looked. He held her gaze. And I'm here because I need you to know that I sent Evelyn away yesterday. She came to the estate with luggage. I told her to leave. Charlotte's expression changed very slightly. You did? Yes. A pause. Why? She asked. And the question was careful, not hopeful, not relieved careful. The question of a woman who has been disappointed enough times to check the ground carefully before she steps. Because I read the letters, he said, the ones you wrote to me about her. And I looked at her face when I mentioned them, and I saw something there that I should have seen a long time ago. He paused. I don't know the full extent of what she was planning, but I know it was not what she told me it was. And I know that you tried to warn me, and I was too self-satisfied to listen. Silence. The kitchen sounds. Eleanor Hayes, making no pretense of not being nearby, were the only thing in the house. Charlotte set down her cup a second time. Nathaniel, I need you to understand something. Her voice was steady and quiet, and absolutely serious. I am not angry with Evelyn Harrington. Not primarily. She is a woman who saw an opportunity and pursued it. I understand ambition. A pause. What I cannot forgive or cannot forgive, yet I don't know, is that the opportunity she saw was the space you left. The gap between us. She did not create that gap. You did. By not seeing me. By not listening. By treating this marriage as something that maintained itself. The words landed. Not loudly, but with considerable precision. Nathaniel stood in the middle of the Reverend's parlor and felt the accuracy of every single one. I know, he said. I need more than that. I know that too. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. The look of a woman measuring something she cannot see clearly enough yet to judge. I am not coming home today, she said. I'm not asking you to. I need time. I need... She paused, and for the first time something moved across her face that was less composed than the rest of her. Something that was simply the face of a woman who was tired and hurt, and trying very hard to think clearly through both. I need to know that if I come back, it is to something different. Not a better managed version of the same thing. Something actually different. Then tell me what that looks like, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. You've never asked me that before. No, he said. I haven't. The morning stretched between them warm and complicated and not resolved. Eleanor Hayes appeared in the doorway of the kitchen with the practiced timing of a woman who has listened to enough difficult conversations to know when one has reached its natural resting point. More tea, Charlotte? She asked pleasantly. Charlotte turned to her. "Yes, please," she said. Nathaniel understood that the conversation was over for now. He put his hat back on and walked to the parlor door, and then he stopped because there was one more thing he needed to say, and he did not want to leave without saying it. "Charlotte." She looked at him. "Martha and Thomas and the others, do you know where they've gone? Are they taken care of?" Something shifted in Charlotte's face, subtle but real. "Martha is at her sister's," she said. "Thomas has people in the next county. The others have arrangements. I made sure before—" She stopped. Then quietly, "Yes, they are taken care of." Of course she had made sure. Of course, before she left, she had made sure every single person who left with her had somewhere to go. Nathaniel nodded once. "Thank you," he said. He left. He rode home through the rising heat of the Virginia morning, and the town was awake now, properly awake, people on the street, and wagons on the road, and the ordinary business of a summer day in full motion around him. He was aware of eyes following him. The story was moving already. He could feel it in the particular attention his passage drew, the conversations that paused as he rode by. He had about one day, he estimated, before the version of this story that served Evelyn Harrington's interests became the version most people believed. He needed to act before then. He rode home and changed his jacket and got back on his horse and rode directly to the office of Edward Crane, the county magistrate. He did not have an appointment. He also did not care. Edward's clerk tried to tell him the magistrate was in a meeting. "Tell him Nathaniel Whitmore needs 15 minutes, Nathaniel said. "Tell him it concerns his widow's charity account and the woman who manages it." The clerk disappeared. He was back in under a minute. "He'll see you now," the clerk said. Edward Crane's office was a room that smelled of law books and pipe smoke, and the accumulated weight of a great many decisions that had seemed simple at the time. Edward himself was behind his desk, the expression of polite concern from the previous morning replaced by something more alert and considerably more interested. "Nathaniel, sit down." Nathaniel sat. "Tell me about the charity account," Nathaniel said. "The one Charlotte manages. How long has she been involved?" Edward looked at him with the careful attention of a man who is deciding how much to say. 7 years, he said. "She approached me in 1810, when the county had no formal system for widow assistance. 3 women in the South District had lost their husbands within 6 months and had no income and no resources. Charlotte organized the fund. She solicited contributions from 12 families in the area. Your estate contributed, by the way, though I suspect you did not know that, and she established a distribution system that has now assisted 41 women and their children." A pause. "She has also, in the past 4 years, quietly negotiated on behalf of 6 of those women with creditors who were attempting to exploit their circumstances. She has a gift for it, actually. She understands people's motivations with unusual clarity." Nathaniel was quiet. "She never told me," he said. "No," Edward said. "She did not." He leaned back in his chair. "Nathaniel, I have known you for 20 years. I am going to say something that I say as a friend, and not as a magistrate, and I would appreciate it if you received it in that spirit." "Go ahead. Your wife is one of the most genuinely respected people in this county, not because of your name, despite the fact that your name is what most people see first." He held Nathaniel's gaze. "I have watched her work for 7 years. She is careful and honest, and she understands what it means to actually serve a community as opposed to simply being seen to serve one. The people who left with her yesterday morning are not fools or ingrates. They left because they know something about her that you apparently—" He stopped himself. "I'm sorry, that was too much." "No," Nathaniel said. "Finish it." Edward considered. "They left because they know something about her that you have apparently been too busy to learn," he said. "Even though you have had 11 years and a great deal of access." The clock on Edward's wall ticked through several seconds. "There's something else," Nathaniel said. "The letters. The ones Charlotte sent me during her concern about Evelyn Harrington. I did not receive them, or I received them, and they were misdirected to me in a way that meant I never read them properly. I need to understand what happened to them." Edward's expression sharpened. "You think they were intercepted?" "I think it is possible." Nathaniel paused. Evelyn Harrington has been a regular visitor to the estate for over a year. She had access to the household correspondence system, which Charlotte managed, and which I now understand was not managed by anyone else once Evelyn began spending time there. A pause. That is a serious accusation, Edward said carefully. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you what I know and what I suspect, and I'm asking for your guidance as the county magistrate on what the appropriate course of action is. Edward was very still for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Nathaniel talked for 40 minutes. He told Edward about the document, about the account books, about the letters he had found drafts of in Charlotte's sitting room, about Evelyn's arrival the following morning with luggage, the expression on her face when she looked at the estate, the flicker he had seen when he mentioned the letters, the fraction of a second that was not surprise. Edward listened without interrupting. When Nathaniel finished, Edward set down his pen and was quiet for a moment. I want to speak with Charlotte directly, he said, with her permission, and I want to speak with Thomas Briggs. Thomas is observant and honest, and if anything was happening in that household that shouldn't have been, he will have noticed. He looked at Nathaniel. In the meantime, do nothing to alert the Harrington family that there is any official interest in this matter. Understood. And Nathaniel. Edward's voice was level. Whatever the investigation reveals, and I am not yet certain there is anything to investigate, the personal situation between you and Charlotte is yours to manage. The law can address the question of the letters if they were in fact interfered with. It cannot address the question of a man who did not read his wife's correspondence carefully enough to notice she was sending it. Nathaniel stood up. I know, he said. I was almost at the door when Edward spoke again. She named the school after your mother, he said. Charlotte did. The school on the estate property. I thought perhaps you should know that. Nathaniel stopped. The name on the sign at the gate, Edward continued, is the Whitmore School, but Charlotte asked the children to call it Miss Margaret's after your mother. She said your mother had once told her that she wished there had been a school for the workers' children when she was managing the estate. Charlotte said she wanted to do what your mother would have done if she'd had the chance. Nathaniel stood with one hand on the doorframe and felt something hit him squarely in the chest that he could not have named to anyone. Thank you, he said. He left. He spent the rest of that morning doing something he had not done in years, possibly ever. He rode through his own estate and actually looked at it. Not at the land values. Not at the yields and the accounts and the ledger numbers. He rode the fence lines and looked at the tenant farms, and he stopped at the Harlan property, and he saw the work that had been done to the damaged structure after the flood. Solid, careful repair work, better than the original build. And he saw the kitchen garden that one of the Harlan daughters had planted right up against the south wall, and which was in this summer heat producing abundantly. He stopped at the small building near the edge of the north field, a building he had vaguely registered as some kind of storage structure and had never examined closely. It was not a storage structure. It was a schoolroom. Freshly whitewashed walls, a row of benches, a blackboard, and above the door in neat painted letters, Whitmore School, and below that smaller, in honor of Miss Margaret. Nathaniel stood in front of that door for a long time. Then he got back on his horse. He had one more stop to make. He found Thomas Briggs at the Caldwell farm, 2 miles east. The Caldwells were old family friends of Thomas's, apparently a connection Nathaniel had not known about. Thomas was in the yard, helping with a fence repair, working with the economical efficiency of a man who is good at physical labor and sees no reason to make it look more complicated than it is. He heard Nathaniel coming and turned, and his face went neutral, not hostile, not welcoming, simply waiting to see what was required of him. Thomas, Nathaniel said. He dismounted. I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Thomas said nothing, which was effectively permission. In the past year, Nathaniel said, did you observe anything on the estate, anything involving Miss Harrington or her people that concerned you? Thomas looked at him for a long moment. I told Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Nathaniel went still. You told Charlotte. Last October, I saw one of Miss Harrington's maids in the household correspondence room, the room off the east entry where incoming mail is sorted. I had no cause to be suspicious of a guest's maid, but it was an odd hour, and I mentioned it to Mrs. Whitmore. What did Charlotte do? She thanked me. She said she would look into it. A pause. She wrote to you about it. I know she wrote to you because I saw her seal the letter myself. October. Charlotte had written to him in October about a maid in the correspondence room. He had not received that letter. Or he had received it, and it had been diverted somehow before he read it during the weeks when Evelyn Harrington was a frequent visitor to the estate and had access to rooms that it was becoming very clear she should not have had access to. Thomas, Nathaniel said, I need you to tell the county magistrate what you just told me. Thomas studied him. Why? Because I believe it matters for what happens next, and because I believe it will help Charlotte. A beat. Thomas set down his fence post. When? He said. Today, if you're willing. Thomas looked at him for one more long moment, the look of a man who has spent 30 years watching someone and has formed a very clear view of his character and is deciding whether the past 2 days suggest that view should be revised. All right, Thomas said. They rode into town together. Edward Crane was still in his office. He heard Thomas Briggs's account of October without any expression at all, which in a lawyer and magistrate was its own kind of signal. When Thomas finished, Edward was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen again. I'll need to speak with the Harrington household, he said. Carefully and through appropriate channels. This will take some time, a week perhaps 2. He looked at both of them. In the meantime, I want to speak with Charlotte. And I want her to know that what she is hearing from me, she is hearing in my official capacity. He looked at Nathaniel directly. This is not a favor to you. This is the law doing what it is supposed to do. I understand, Nathaniel said. He meant it. He wrote a Home Alone. The estate was quiet in the afternoon heat, the particular quiet of a large property with no one working it. A silence that was nothing like peaceful rest and everything like absence. He unsaddled his own horse again, managing it somewhat better than he had that morning, and put the horse in the stable and made sure the water trough was full. He went into the house. Made himself something to eat badly, with the limited competence of a man who has been fed by other people his entire life, and he ate it at the kitchen table, and he did not find it pleasant, but he ate it anyway. And then he did something he had not done in years. He wrote to Charlotte, not a short note. Not a practical communication about estate matters. A real letter, a long one, the kind that takes a man 2 hours to write because he keeps stopping to make sure he is saying what he actually means and not what sounds best. He told her about the school, about seeing the sign, about the name above the door. He told her about Thomas, about the letter from October that had not reached him. He told her that he had spoken to Edward Crane and what Edward was going to look into and what Thomas had said. He told her that none of that was why he was writing. He told her that he was writing because he was sitting in his kitchen at the table where Martha Collins had made his breakfast for 35 years, in a house that he had thought of for 11 years as simply his estate, his investment, his inheritance, his name on the land. And he understood now that this had been wrong in a way that went deeper than any single decision or failure. He wrote, "You did not build this for me. You built it because it was the right thing to do. You built it because you actually saw the people around you. I have been living inside the thing you built and calling it mine, and I do not know yet how to make that right. But I am going to try to figure that out. Not because I need you to come home, because you deserve to know that I finally understand what I was looking at." He folded the letter. He addressed it to Charlotte, care of Reverend and Mrs. Hayes. He would ride it into town himself in the morning. He sat in the kitchen as the light changed and the heat outside pressed against the walls of the house, and the summer evening came on slowly over the Virginia hills, and Nathaniel Whitmore sat alone with the full weight of a reckoning that was not finished, not even close to finished, and he did not try to outrun it. He sat with it, because there was nothing else left to do. And somewhere in that sitting, in that stillness, that was neither peace nor despair, but simply the hard, unglamorous beginning of actually paying attention. Something shifted in him. Not forgiveness, not resolution. Just the first tentative, entirely uncelebrated beginning of change. The letter reached Charlotte the next morning. Eleanor Hayes brought it to her at the breakfast table, without comment, set it beside her cup, and returned to the kitchen with the quiet discretion of a woman who understood that some things required privacy. Charlotte looked at the envelope for a long moment before she opened it. She recognized Nathaniel's handwriting on the outside. She had seen it on estate documents, on contracts, on the occasional brief note left on her writing desk. When he remembered she existed in a capacity beyond household management. His handwriting was precise and controlled the handwriting of a man who had been educated to express authority even in penmanship. She broke the seal. She read it once quickly, the way people read things they are afraid of. Then she sat very still for a moment. Then she read it again. Slowly. When she set it down, Eleanor had reappeared in the doorway with the coffee pot and the expression of a woman who was not going to ask but was absolutely available if asked. "He knows about Thomas," Charlotte said. "About the letter I sent in October." Eleanor poured the coffee. "Is that good?" she asked. Charlotte thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. But her hands, which had been steady since the morning she walked out of Whitmore Estate, were not entirely steady when she folded the letter and placed it carefully in the pocket of her borrowed dress. She spent that morning at the Reverend's writing desk, answering correspondence that had accumulated during the chaos of the past 2 days. The charity fund accounts needed attention. 2 of the women she assisted had sent notes asking if everything was all right, because the news from Whitmore Estate had traveled faster than she had anticipated, and people were worried about her. She wrote back to both of them, brief, reassuring, practical, and she tried not to think about the letter in her pocket. She was not entirely successful. By mid-morning, she had a visitor. She heard the knock at the front door, heard Eleanor answer. It heard a voice she did not immediately recognize asking for Mrs. Whitmore. Then Eleanor appeared in the study doorway with an expression that mixed caution and curiosity in roughly equal parts. "There is a young woman here," Eleanor said. "She says her name is Abigail. She was one of your kitchen girls." Charlotte stood up. Abigail was 19 years old, the youngest of the kitchen staff, a girl who had come to Whitmore Estate 2 years ago from a family in the western part of the county that had fallen on difficult times. Charlotte had trained her personally, had watched her grow from a frightened girl who apologized for everything into someone who moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence and real skill. She was standing in the Reverend's front hall now, with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes red from recent crying, and a look on her face that Charlotte recognized as the specific expression of someone who has made a decision they are not sure was right. "Abigail." Charlotte went to her immediately. "Come sit down. What's happened?" "Nothing's happened." Abigail shook her head quickly. "I'm all right. I'm staying with my cousin in town. She has room and she's been kind. I just—" She stopped, tried again. "I needed to tell you something, Mrs. Whitmore, something I saw, and I didn't know who else to tell." Charlotte sat down beside her. "Tell me," she said. Abigail looked at her hands. "It was 3 weeks ago," she said, "before all of this. I was bringing linens up from the laundry early before most people were awake, and I came through the east entry hall. The correspondence room door was open." Charlotte went very still. "Miss Harrington was inside," Abigail said. "Not her maid, her. She was at the sorting table and she had letters in her hands, multiple letters." She looked up at Charlotte. "I almost said good morning before I realized what she was doing. She had a letter open, Mrs. Whitmore. She was reading it. And then she folded it and set it aside, not in the outgoing stack, not in the incoming stack. She set it in a separate small pile that she had beside her. And then she picked up another one. The room was very quiet. "Did she see you?" Charlotte asked. "No, ma'am. I stepped back before she looked up." Abigail's voice was steady, but her hands were not. "I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. I thought maybe she had permission to be in there. I didn't want to cause trouble." She looked at Charlotte with the expression of someone who has been carrying guilt for 3 weeks and is very tired of it. "I should have told you then. I know I should have. I'm sorry." Charlotte reached out and covered Abigail's hands with her own. "You are telling me now," she said. "That is what matters, and you are going to need to tell someone else as well, the county magistrate, Edward Crane. Can you do that?" Abigail blinked. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Charlotte said clearly. "You are a witness. There is a very large difference." Abigail nodded, swallowed hard, and said she could do it. Charlotte sent word to Edward Crane within the hour. By afternoon, Abigail had given her account to the magistrate in the same deliberate, honest detail she had given Charlotte. Charlotte sat beside her throughout, saying nothing. Her presence, the only reassurance the girl needed to keep her voice steady. Edward Crane listened to every word. When Abigail finished, he was quiet for a moment, in the way he had been quiet when Nathaniel and Thomas had spoken to him, the silence of a man assembling information into a shape he could act on. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I believe I now have enough to request access to the Harrington household correspondence records. Legally. Through the appropriate channels." He paused. "This may take several days to arrange without alerting the family prematurely. I need to ask for your patience." "You have it," Charlotte said. She walked Abigail back to her cousin's house herself, and on the way back to the Reverend's, she allowed herself for the first time in 2 days to feel the full complicated weight of what was happening around her. She had known something was wrong with Evelyn Harrington for over a year. She had felt it the way women who pay careful attention to people feel things, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a slow accumulation of small wrongnesses. The way Evelyn looked at Nathaniel when he was not looking at her. The way she asked questions that were slightly too specific about the estate finances, about contracts, about the relationships Nathaniel had with other wealthy families in the county. The way she had gradually, and with great charm, made herself indispensable to Nathaniel's social life, in ways that had nothing to do with the estate management she claimed to care about. Charlotte had tried to tell him. She had tried carefully because she understood that a wife accusing a charming woman of bad intentions without concrete evidence would sound like jealousy to a man who did not want to look closely. She had tried to gather the evidence, and someone had made sure Nathaniel never received what she sent. The anger she felt about that was real and sharp, and she did not try to soften it. It was legitimate anger, the kind that comes from having done the right thing and been made invisible doing it, and she gave herself permission to feel it without letting it make her decisions for her. She was nearly back at the Reverend's when she heard her name. She turned. Martha Collins was coming down the street with the deliberate stride of a woman on a mission, her good summer hat slightly askew from walking fast, her expression the one she reserved for situations that required immediate practical action. "Charlotte." Martha reached her and stopped and looked at her with the frank, steady assessment that had always made Charlotte feel simultaneously evaluated and safe. "You look tired." "I'm fine, Martha." "You look tired," Martha repeated, as if Charlotte had said nothing at all. "Come, walk with me." They walked. Martha did not speak for half a block. When she did, her voice was quiet and direct. "There is talk in this town," she said. "Serious talk. And I want you to know what is being said before you hear it from someone else." Charlotte looked at her. "Evelyn Harrington has been speaking to people," Martha said. "Since yesterday evening. She went to the Caldwell family first, they are old allies of her father, and then to the Morehouse family, and then to the pastor of the Presbyterian Church, which is where the wealthiest families in the county worship." A pause. "She is telling people that you left the estate voluntarily and took the servants with you as an act of, she is calling it, spite. She is saying that you have been unhappy in your marriage for years, and that you manufactured a crisis to embarrass your husband publicly." Martha's voice remained even throughout this recitation, with the quality of someone delivering information that is unpleasant but necessary. "She is also suggesting that the charity fund accounts may not have been managed with full transparency." Charlotte stopped walking. "She is saying that about the fund." "Yes." The clarity of the anger that moved through Charlotte in that moment was almost physical. Not the slow, complicated grief of the past 2 days. Something sharper and more immediate. The anger of a woman who has spent 7 years building something careful and honest and good, and is now watching someone attempt to dismantle it with words. "How many people has she spoken to?" Charlotte asked. "Enough," Martha said. "It is not yet the common story, but it will be if nothing counters it." Charlotte started walking again. "Edward Crane is already involved," she said. "The investigation is moving. I cannot speak publicly about what is being investigated, but—" "You don't need to speak publicly," Martha said. "You need to let the people who know you do the speaking." She reached out and touched Charlotte's arm briefly, the touch of a woman who does not offer reassurance lightly. "Charlotte, do you know how many people in this county you have helped directly? How many women in that fund? How many families on the estate? How many people Thomas Briggs has spoken to since yesterday morning? Charlotte looked at her. Thomas is talking. Thomas is not a man who talks easily, Martha said. Which is why when he does, people listen. He has spoken to 4 families in the past 2 days. He told them the truth about the winter of 14 and the flood and what you did when nobody was watching. She paused. The truth is already moving, Charlotte. It is just moving more slowly than the lie, because the truth does not have Evelyn Harrington's energy. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need to speak to the women in the fund, directly, before the lie reaches them. I thought you might say that, Martha said. I have already sent word to 3 of them. They will come to Eleanor Hayes's parlor tomorrow morning, if you want them there. Charlotte looked at the older woman beside her. 62 years old, gray-haired, built small and solid as the Virginia hills, and felt the particular emotion of being cared for by someone who does not make a performance of caring, who simply does the next thing that needs doing, and trusts that you will understand the love in it. Martha, she said, I don't know how to thank you. Then don't, Martha said briskly. It would embarrass us both. Now, have you eaten a proper supper? Because you look like you have not. Charlotte had not. They ate supper at the Reverend's table, Martha, Charlotte, Reverend and Eleanor Hayes and Thomas Briggs, who arrived 20 minutes after they sat down with the quiet purposefulness of a man who had decided where he was supposed to be. The meal was simple, and the conversation was real. The kind of conversation that does not avoid hard things, but also does not make hard things the only thing. And Charlotte sat at that table in the summer evening, and felt the solid ground of people who chose her. And it was both comfort and grief, because the choice of 93 people was also the loneliness of a marriage that had not known how to hold her. She did not say that out loud. But Eleanor Hayes, who had been watching her across the table for 2 days, reached over after supper and pressed her hand once briefly and said nothing. Some things don't need saying. That night, after everyone had gone, Charlotte sat alone at the Reverend's writing desk and took Nathaniel's letter out of her pocket and read it a 3rd time. She read the line about the school, about the name above the door. She had put that name there because she had meant it, because Nathaniel's mother Margaret had once sat with Charlotte on the back porch of the estate in the 1st year of the marriage, in the last summer of Margaret's life, and said quietly, I always wished I could do more for the children here. I kept thinking someday. I ran out of some days. And she had pressed Charlotte's hand in a way that felt like a request as much as a farewell. Charlotte had not told Nathaniel about that conversation. She had not thought he would understand it. She read the last paragraph of his letter again. You did not build this for me. You built it because it was the right thing to do. She folded the letter. She did not write back that night, but she did not throw it away either. She went to bed, and she slept better than she had expected, to the sleep of someone who is exhausted and has, at least for tonight, done everything that could be done. The next morning came fast and sharp, with the particular urgency that had characterized every morning since she left the estate. The women from the charity fund arrived at Eleanor Hayes's parlor at 9 o'clock, 5 of them ranging in age from 26 to 58 women whose circumstances varied, but whose relationship with Charlotte had one common quality. She had shown up for them when they needed it, without drama and without debt, and they remembered. Charlotte stood in the parlor and looked at their faces and did not try to be anything other than direct. You have heard things about me in the past 2 days, she said. Some of those things are true. I left my husband's estate. I did it because of a document he signed that removed my authority over everything I have managed there for 11 years. I did it because I reached a point where staying had become a way of making myself invisible, and I could not do it anymore. She paused. Other things you may have heard are not true. The fund accounts are clean and documented and have been managed with complete transparency. I will open every record to any review anyone requests. I have nothing to hide. The oldest of the women, Ruth Mosley, 58, a widow who had been the first person Charlotte helped when she started the fund 7 years ago, looked at her steadily. Charlotte, she said, nobody in this room needs to be told that. I know, Charlotte said, but I needed to say it. Ruth nodded. Then it's said, she said. Now, what do you need from us? Charlotte looked around the room at 5 women who had every reason to be cautious and were instead sitting in a borrowed parlor on a Tuesday morning ready to help. "I need witnesses," she said. "If the fund accounts are questioned formally, I need people who can speak to how the fund actually operates. I need honesty, not defense. If anyone in this room has any concern about how I have managed this, I need to hear it now." Silence. "Nothing but gratitude," said one of the younger women, barely 26, who had 2 children and had been managing alone for 3 years. "Same," said the woman beside her. "Then we stand with you," Ruth said simply. And that was that. They spent an hour going over the accounts together. Charlotte walked them through every record, every distribution, every note she had made over 7 years, the kind of thorough accounting that could stand in front of any magistrate or church board in the county. They were almost finished when there was a knock at the Reverend's front door. Eleanor Hayes answered it. A moment later, she appeared in the parlor doorway with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that meant it was containing something significant. "Charlotte," she said, "Edward Crane is here. He says it's important." Charlotte excused herself. Edward was in the front hall, hat in hand, with the focused stillness of a man carrying information that changes things. "The Harrington household correspondence records," he said without preamble. "I sent my clerk this morning with a formal request under county authority. Mr. Harrington, Evelyn's father, refused access." Charlotte looked at him. "He refused a magistrate's request. He refused, which, as I am sure you understand, is itself informative." Edward's voice was dry. "Refusal of a lawful magistrate's inquiry in the Commonwealth of Virginia is not something a man does unless he has a significant reason to believe compliance would be damaging." He paused. "I have sent to the circuit court in Richmond for authority to compel access. That will take 4 days, possibly 5. "And in those 4 days," Charlotte asked, "in those 4 days, I would encourage you to continue exactly what you are doing, which appears to be making sure that people who know the truth know it clearly before the version of events that is currently being circulated has time to become permanent." He looked at her directly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have been magistrate of this county for 14 years. I have seen a great many situations in which the powerful protected themselves by moving quickly to establish a story before evidence could contradict it. What I am also seeing, and I want you to know, this is that the foundation of your reputation in this community is considerably more solid than I believe the Harrington family anticipated." Charlotte absorbed this. "Evelyn is still talking?" she asked. "Her father is now talking as well," Edward said. "And he is considerably more sophisticated at it than she is. He is framing this as a domestic matter, a wife who abandoned her husband and took the servants as retaliation, and he is suggesting that any legal inquiry into his family's affairs is being pursued at the instigation of a woman acting out of personal grievance. The calculation in that was almost elegant. Charlotte could see the architecture of it reduce everything to marital drama. Make her motivations suspect, neutralize the witnesses by suggesting they were recruited rather than genuine. "He is trying to make this about my marriage," she said. "Yes." "Then I need Nathaniel," she said. The words came out before she had fully thought them, and she stood with them for a moment after checking them against what she actually felt, making sure they were true and not just strategy. They were true. She needed Nathaniel because an investigation into mail tampering and correspondence interference required him to be a credible complainant, not just a wronged husband. It required him to stand up in front of the county and say something was done to my household and to my wife, and I am asking for it to be addressed. Without that, without Nathaniel's public commitment to the truth of what had happened, the Harrington version domestic drama, grieving wife exaggerated accusations, had a fighting chance. "I need him to understand what he is being asked to do," she said. "It is not a small thing. The Harrington family has influence and money, and they will not go quietly." "No," Edward agreed. "They will not." Charlotte looked at the magistrate. "Can you get word to him today?" "I can," Edward said. "Tell him I need to speak with him. Tell him—" She paused, choosing her words with the precision she always brought to the things that mattered. "Tell him that this is no longer simply about our marriage. Tell him that what he does in the next 4 days will determine not just what is true, but whether the truth survives." Edward put his hat back on. "I'll send word within the hour," he said. He left. Charlotte stood in the Reverend's front hall alone for a moment. Then she went back to the parlor, and the 5 women waiting inside, and the accounts spread across Eleanor Hayes's table, and she sat down, and she continued the work. Because the work was what she knew how to do. Because the work was what had always been true about her. From the first morning she arrived at Whitmore Estate, as a 20-year-old woman that everyone considered a poor choice, and the work was what would still be true when this was over, whatever over turned out to mean. The afternoon brought Nathaniel. He arrived at the Reverend's house at 4 o'clock 40 minutes after Edward Crane's message reached him. Charlotte could tell from the slight dishevelment of his jacket, and the fact that he had clearly ridden fast, that he had come immediately. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept enough, and had spent the time he was awake, thinking harder than he was accustomed to thinking. He also looked for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, like someone who was paying attention. Eleanor Hayes let him in, and led him to the parlor, where Charlotte was alone. Now the other women had left an hour ago. He sat across from her without being asked, and he did not begin with pleasantries, which she appreciated. "Edward told me what is happening," he said. "All of it." "Then you understand what I'm asking," she said. "I understand." He held her gaze. "Charlotte, if I stand up publicly and pursue this investigation, the Harrington family will spend whatever is necessary to discredit us both. They will make it ugly and personal, and they will not limit themselves to the truth." He paused. "I need you to know that I understand that. I am not walking into this thinking it will be clean." "I know it won't be clean," she said. "I have never been under that illusion." "I know," he said. "I know you haven't." And there was something in his voice when he said it, a quality she had not heard there before, a kind of honest self-awareness that was still new, but was clearly real. "I'm telling you, because I want you to know that I am not doing this because it is easy. I am doing it because it is what should be done, and because—" He stopped. Charlotte waited. "Because you spent 11 years doing what should be done," he said quietly. "Even when it was not seen. Even when it was not thanked. Even when I was somewhere else not paying attention." He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. "The least I can do is stand up when standing up matters." The room was quiet. Charlotte felt something move in her that she did not quite have a word for. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not resolution of anything, but something that was the beginning of believing that the man sitting across from her was not simply performing remorse, but was actually slowly becoming something different than what he had been. It was not enough, but it was not nothing. "There is one more thing," she said. "Tell me, Abigail." Charlotte watched his face. "The kitchen girl. She is 19 years old, and she has given testimony to the magistrate about what she saw in that correspondence room, and when this becomes public, she will be vulnerable. The Harrington family will look for ways to discredit her. I need you to make sure she is protected. I need your name behind her." Nathaniel did not hesitate. "She has it," he said. "I mean it, Nathaniel. Not as a courtesy, as a commitment." "I mean it too," he said. Something settled between them that was not yet peace and not yet trust, but it was the architecture of something that could eventually become both. Charlotte stood up. "Then go speak to Edward Crane," she said. "Tell him you are formally requesting the circuit court inquiry. Tell him you want Thomas Briggs's testimony on record. Tell him about the letters, all of them." She paused. "And tell him about the school if he doesn't already know. Tell him about the winter of 14 and the flood and the charity fund. Tell him everything in those account books." She looked at her husband steadily. "Make sure that when the Harrington version of this story reaches Richmond, there is already another version there waiting for it." Nathaniel stood. He looked at her, the long, honest look of a man seeing someone clearly, possibly for the first time. "Charlotte," he said, "I am sorry. I know that is inadequate. I know it does not fix what 11 years of inattention cost you. But I need to say it, and I need to say it without asking you to do anything with it. You don't have to accept it or respond to it. I just—" He stopped. "I am sorry." Charlotte looked at him. "I know," she said. She did not say more than that, but she said it as if she meant it. He left. And Charlotte stood in Eleanor Hayes's parlor as the summer light changed around her, and she felt the turning of something vast and slow that she could not yet see the shape of, and she pressed her hand flat against the account books on the table beside her. 7 years of careful, honest work, a record of what she was, and what she had done, and what she had chosen, and she breathed. Outside, the investigation was moving. Outside, Nathaniel Whitmore was riding to the magistrate's office to do the hard public thing for the first time. Outside, the Harrington family was about to discover that the woman they had underestimated had not left because she was weak. She had left because she finally understood her own worth. And now the rest of the county was about to understand it too. Edward Crane received Nathaniel at his office just before 5 o'clock that afternoon, and the conversation that followed was the longest and most consequential either man had ever had in that room. Nathaniel did not sit down this time. He stood in the center of the magistrate's office, and he talked for nearly an hour. Not in the careful, measured way of a man protecting his interests, but in the raw, unguarded way of a man who has spent 3 days reading the truth about himself and has finally run out of room to look away from it. He talked about the account books, about the winter of 14, and the flood, and the school, and the charity fund, and 7 years of letters about widows that his wife had managed while he was in Richmond, congratulating himself on land disputes. He talked about the letters Charlotte had sent him, about Thomas Briggs and the correspondence room, and Abigail in the hall at 5 in the morning, watching Evelyn Harrington read private mail by lamplight. He talked until there was nothing left to say. Edward Crane listened to all of it without interrupting once. When Nathaniel finally stopped, the magistrate was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen, dipped it, and began writing on the formal county document paper that he reserved for things that would eventually be read aloud in courtrooms. "I am filing this as a formal complaint," Edward said, not looking up. "Not a domestic matter, not a civil dispute between families. A formal complaint involving unlawful interference with private correspondence, which under the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia carries significant consequence." He paused in his writing. "The circuit court authorization arrived from Richmond an hour ago. I sent for it yesterday before you came to me based on Thomas Briggs's testimony alone." He looked up. "I want you to understand that this investigation existed before you walked through my door this afternoon. It does not require your participation to proceed." Nathaniel looked at him. "Then why does Charlotte think it does?" Edward set his pen down. "Because without you," he said plainly. "It is a story about a woman who left her husband and is now making accusations. With you, it is a story about a household that was deliberately manipulated, a wife who was systematically silenced, and a man who is willing to stand in front of this county and say so." He paused. "The law can compel the Harrington records with or without you. What the law cannot do is change what people believe about your wife. That requires you." The silence in the room had the quality of something landing. Nathaniel picked up the pen from Edward's desk. "Tell me where to sign," he said. He signed 3 documents before he left that office. The formal complaint, the petition for compelled access to the Harrington correspondence, a sworn statement about the letters, every one he could account for every gap in the record where a letter should have arrived and had not. He wrote, "Home in the dying summer light, with the feeling of a man who has done something that cannot be undone, and is for the first time in a very long while glad about that fact." The estate was still empty when he arrived. He had been managing it alone for 3 days now. Managing was perhaps too generous a word for what he had been doing, which mostly consisted of not burning anything down and keeping his horse alive and eating whatever he could locate in the kitchen that did not require significant preparation. The silence of the place no longer felt like absence in the way it had the first morning. It had shifted into something else, a kind of weight that he carried through the rooms, a constant reminder of what 93 people choosing to leave actually felt like when you were the one left behind. I went to his study and lit a lamp and sat down at his desk. He had one more letter to write. This one was not to Charlotte. It was to George Harrington, Evelyn's father, 61 years old, a man who had made his considerable wealth in merchant trading, and who had spent the past 2 decades using that wealth to purchase the social influence that old Virginia families like the Whitmores held by birthright. Nathaniel had known him for 15 years, had done business with him, had considered him in the loose way of men who move in the same circles without examining the relationship too closely, something like a colleague. He wrote the letter carefully in the precise controlled handwriting that expressed authority even in penmanship. He informed George Harrington that the county magistrate had filed a formal complaint and that the circuit court had authorized access to the Harrington household correspondence records. He informed him that this was not a negotiation. He informed him that if there was any further attempt to publicly characterize Charlotte Whitmore's reputation, the accounts or the charity fund, in any defamatory manner, he would pursue every legal remedy available. And he informed him in the final paragraph in language that was entirely clear but sufficiently formal to be read aloud in any venue that whatever his daughter had intended to accomplish at Whitmore Estate was finished. He sealed it. He would send it in the morning. He went to bed before 9 o'clock, which was something he had not done since childhood, and he slept the way people sleep when their conscience has been slightly eased, not well, but better. The next 4 days moved with the particular pace of a situation that is building towards something inevitable, but has not arrived yet. Edward Crane's clerk arrived at the Harrington estate on the second morning with the circuit court order. George Harrington did not refuse twice. The records were produced not willingly, not without a lawyer present from Richmond, who charged considerably more per day than most men in the county earned in a month, but they were produced. Edward worked through them himself personally, with the focused thoroughness of a man who has been waiting a long time for a problem to present itself in a form he could actually address. On the third afternoon, he sent word to both Charlotte and Nathaniel separately he had found what he needed. They came to his office together, not by plan, simply by arriving at the same time, which produced the slightly awkward situation of Nathaniel holding the door open for his wife as they entered a building they were both using to manage the consequences of his failure to pay attention. Charlotte thanked him for the door with the precise politeness of a woman who was managing a great many things simultaneously and did not have the bandwidth to give that moment more weight than it needed. They sat across from Edward's desk. Edward did not preamble. 6 letters, he said. Over a period of 8 months beginning last October. 6 letters written by Charlotte Whitmore, addressed to Nathaniel Whitmore, which entered the household correspondence system at Whitmore Estate, and did not arrive at their intended destination. He set 6 pages on the desk, not the originals, which were now evidence, but careful copies in his clerk's hand. The originals were found in a locked box in Evelyn Harrington's private correspondence case, which was among the records turned over under court order. He paused. They were opened. Several of them were red, we can tell by the refolding marks. 3 of them were resealed with a wax impression that is not Mrs. Whitmore's seal. The room was entirely still. Charlotte looked at the copies of her own letters laid out on Edward's desk, and felt something move through her that was not quite vindication. It was more complicated than that. It was the strange, specific grief of being proven right about something you had desperately hoped you were wrong about. Because being wrong would have meant it was simply carelessness. This was deliberate. This was a woman who had read Charlotte's growing concern about herself, and chosen each time to make sure it never reached its destination. She read them, Charlotte said. Her voice was very quiet. Yes, Edward said. She knew I was trying to warn him. Yes. Charlotte was silent for a moment. Nathaniel was looking at the copies on the desk with an expression that Charlotte had not seen on his face before and could not immediately name. It was not guilt. She knew what his guilt looked like. She had seen it in fragments over the past 3 days. This was something else. Something harder and more specific. The expression of a man who has moved past feeling bad about what happened and is now in the territory of genuinely reckoning with what was done to the person he was supposed to protect. What happens now? He said. His voice was flat, not calm flat. The voice of a man controlling something. The circuit court in Richmond will receive a formal report, Edward said. What actions George Harrington chooses to take with his daughter's situation is a family matter that will likely move through civil channels. What I can tell you is that the correspondence interference is documented, and the documentation is now part of the county record, which means it is available to anyone who wishes to review it. He looked at both of them, including anyone who has been hearing a particular story from the Harrington family over the past week. Nathaniel understood immediately. You can make it public, he said. I can make the record available, Edward said carefully. What is done with a public record is the business of the public. Nathaniel nodded. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte was still looking at the copies of her letters. Charlotte, Nathaniel said. She looked up. I want to make it public, he said. I want everyone in this county who heard Evelyn's version to have access to the truth. Not because I need to punish anyone, because you deserve for the truth to be known. He paused. But I will not do it without your agreement. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the letters. 6 letters, 8 months. A woman who had been trying to reach her husband through a closed door that she did not know had been locked from the outside. Make it public, she said. The story moved through Millhaven and the surrounding county in the way that true things move when they have good evidence behind them. Not explosively, but steadily with the particular authority of documented fact. Edward Crane did not need to announce anything dramatically. He simply made the record available, and the people who had been listening to George Harrington's careful version of events suddenly had access to 6 letters in a locked box and a wax seal that did not belong to Charlotte Whitmore. And they drew the conclusions that honest people draw when presented with honest evidence. The first person to come to Charlotte after the record became available was Ruth Mosley. She arrived at Eleanor Hayes's house on a Thursday morning, knocked firmly, and when Charlotte opened the door, Ruth said, I told everyone I knew at church last Sunday that you ran that fund with complete integrity, based on 7 years of personal experience. I am here to tell you that I am now saying the same thing based on documented evidence as well, and that I intend to say it loudly and repeatedly until it replaces the other story entirely. Charlotte said, Ruth, I am not finished, Ruth said pleasantly. I am also telling you that Mabel Crane Edwards' wife has spoken to the Presbyterian Ladies' Circle, and what she said was not flattering to the Harrington family, and that Thomas Briggs rode to the Caldwell farm and the Morrison farm and the Hayward farm yesterday and told them what Thomas Briggs saw with his own eyes. She paused. The truth is moving faster than the lie now, Charlotte. I thought you should know. Charlotte stood in Eleanor Hayes's doorway and felt something in her chest ease, not collapse, not dissolve, but ease the way a person feels when they have been holding something heavy for a long time and someone else finally reaches out to share the weight. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Ruth said. Come have coffee and tell me what you need next. What Charlotte needed next arrived in a form she had not anticipated. George Harrington came to Edward Crane's office on the 5th day. Not with his Richmond lawyer. Alone. Charlotte heard about it from Edward himself, who sent word to her within the hour of the meeting. George Harrington had sat across from the magistrate, and in the manner of a man who has calculated every option and found them all unfavorable, asked what it would take to resolve the matter without further official proceedings. Edward had told him plainly there was nothing he could offer to stop the circuit court record from existing. The record existed. What George Harrington could do was cease and desist from any further public characterization of Charlotte Whitmore's conduct or reputation. He could make a voluntary contribution to the County Widows Fund, the fund his daughter had attempted to implicate in her fabricated narrative, in an amount that reflected the seriousness of the damage she had done. And he could, through whatever channels he deemed appropriate, make clear to the people he had spoken to over the past week that his previous statements had been based on incomplete information. George Harrington had sat with that for a long time. Then he asked what the contribution amount should be. Edward Crane told him. George Harrington did not flinch. He wrote a bank draft on the spot. Charlotte received this information sitting at Eleanor Hayes's kitchen table and felt for the first time the strange flatness that comes after a long fight when it begins to resolve not triumph, which she had expected to feel, but something quieter and more complicated. The relief of it. The exhaustion underneath the relief. The awareness that a bank draft and a retracted story did not restore 8 months of letters or the evening in September when Nathaniel had said they would talk tomorrow, and they never did, or the long, slow erosion of being unseen. Martha Collins was in the kitchen with her, as Martha had been most mornings since this began. You don't look like someone who just won, Martha observed. I don't know that I won anything, Charlotte said. I know that what is true is now public. I know that the fund is protected. I know that Abigail is safe. She paused. That's what mattered. Martha looked at her steadily. And Nathaniel, she said. Charlotte was quiet. It was the question she had been turning over every morning since she read his letter, every evening when she went back over the conversation in the Reverend's parlor, every time she thought about the way he had looked at those 6 letters on Edward's desk. Not with the expression of a man managing a situation, but with the expression of a man understanding for the first time what it had actually cost the woman across from him to be his wife. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I know he did the right things. I know he is doing the work of understanding something he should have understood a long time ago." She looked at her hands. "I don't know yet whether that is enough. Or whether enough is even the right question." "What is the right question?" Martha asked. Charlotte thought about it. "Whether I can believe it is real," she said. "Whether I trust that what I am seeing in him now is actually him becoming different, or whether it is him being frightened of what he lost." She paused. "Because I cannot go back to Whitmore Estate and become invisible again. I cannot go back to being the furniture of that marriage, and I will not." She said the last sentence with a quietness that was not uncertainty. It was the quietness of someone who has decided something all the way down to the bone and is finished deciding it. Martha was silent for a moment. "Then you need to tell him that," she said. "I know." "Not in a letter," Martha said. "I know." "In person," Martha said. "Soon." Charlotte looked at her. "You have an opinion about the timing," she said. "I always have an opinion about the timing," Martha said. "You know this about me." Charlotte almost smiled. It was the first time in 8 days that her face had done anything close to that, and Martha, who did not miss much, noticed. "Tomorrow," Charlotte said. Nathaniel received her message that evening. He read it 3 times. It was short, a single paragraph saying only that she would come to the estate in the morning, and that she needed them to have a real conversation, not a managed one, not a careful one, the kind of conversation they had never actually had in 11 years of marriage. She said she did not know what the outcome of that conversation would be, and she asked him not to expect anything from it except honesty. He sat with the message in his study for a long time. Then he went and stood in Charlotte's sitting room, the room he had been avoiding since that first morning. The room where the herbs still sat on the windowsill, and the account books were back in their place, and everything was where she had left it, because he had not moved a single thing. Some combination of respect and guilt, and something he did not fully examine. He stood there in the summer evening, and he thought about what Edward Crane had said. "The law cannot change what people believe about your wife. That requires you." He had done that part. He had done it imperfectly and belatedly, and with the stumbling quality of a man learning something about himself while under pressure. But he had done it. What he had not done, what he could not do, through legal filings, or signed documents, or even careful letters, was answer the question Charlotte was actually asking. Whether he was capable of seeing her. Not strategically. Not in the way of a man who has learned to value something because he lost it. Actually seeing her the way people see each other when a marriage is a real partnership, rather than a man and the woman who runs his house. He did not know the answer to that question yet. I thought he might be starting to know how to learn it. Which was not the same thing. But it was something. He went to bed, and he lay in the dark, and he thought about a woman who had arrived at his estate as a 20-year-old farmer's daughter, and had, without being asked, spent 11 years building something extraordinary, quietly without recognition, because it was what needed to be done, and she was the person who could see that it needed doing. I thought about the name above the school door. Miss Margaret's. His mother's wish turned into something real by the daughter-in-law who had listened when he had not thought to. He thought about what kind of man deserved to be loved by a woman like that. He was not that man yet. He was not certain he could become that man, but he thought that if Charlotte Whitmore was willing to come to the estate tomorrow morning and have an honest conversation, the least he could do was be there fully, completely without defense or performance, and let her see exactly who he was right now. Not who he intended to be, not who he wished he had been, who he was, and trust her to make her own decision from that. He closed his eyes. Outside, the Virginia summer night pressed against the walls of the house, and somewhere in the county Charlotte Whitmore was presumably trying to sleep, and 93 people were living in various borrowed rooms and family homes, and a magistrate's record sat in a county office available to anyone who wanted to read it, and somewhere in Richmond, a circuit court document was making the truth permanent. The house was still empty. But tomorrow morning, Nathaniel thought it would not be entirely empty, and he held that not as a promise, not as a resolution, just as the fact of it, and somewhere in holding it, somewhere between the summer dark and the first gray edge of morning, he finally actually slept. Charlotte arrived at Whitmore Estate at 8 o'clock in the morning. She rode, herself no carriage, no escort. Just her, and a borrowed horse from the Reverend's stable, and the particular stillness of a woman who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. The summer heat was already building. The kind of Virginia morning that promises a brutal afternoon and doesn't apologize for it. She came up the main drive and the estate looked exactly as she had left it 9 days ago, except smaller somehow. Not diminished, just correctly sized. The way places look when you have spent enough time away from them to see them as they actually are, rather than as the whole world. Nathaniel was on the front steps, not waiting dramatically, not positioned for effect. He was simply there the way a man is when he has been up since before sunrise and has run out of things to do with his hands and has finally just stopped moving and stood somewhere. He looked at her when she rode up. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Charlotte dismounted, tied the horse to the post, smoothed her dress with both hands, a habit something she did when she was organizing her thoughts, and walked up the steps toward him. "You came," he said. I said I would, she said. She went inside. He followed. The house still had the quality she had noticed when she walked out of it, that specific hollowness of a place that is structurally intact, but has been emptied of the living that made it real. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee, evidence of Nathaniel's apparently sustained inability to manage a fire at the right temperature. There were 2 cups on the table he had put out, 2 cups she noticed already, and a coffee pot that was at least warm, if not precisely hot. She sat down at the kitchen table. He sat across from her. This was the table where Martha Collins had rolled pastry every morning of Nathaniel's life. This was the table where Charlotte had sat on her first morning at Whitmore Estate 20 years old, and trying very hard not to appear frightened, while Martha had set a plate in front of her with the manner of a woman who had already decided to take care of her. This was the table where the real life of this house had always happened. Not in the formal dining room or the parlor or the study, but here in the kitchen where the work was. Charlotte thought it was the right place for this conversation. "I need to say something first, she said, "before anything else." Nathaniel nodded. "I am not here to decide whether to come back," she said. "I am not here to negotiate the terms of a reconciliation. I am here because there are things I need to say to you directly. Things I should have said a long time ago, and I kept not saying them because I kept believing that if I was patient enough and careful enough and good enough at what I did, you would eventually see it yourself." She held his gaze. "I was wrong about that, and I am done being wrong about it." Nathaniel said nothing. He was listening the way he had not listened in years, with his whole attention without the layer of preoccupation that had always been between his face and whatever she was saying. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for 11 years, even when loving you felt like talking to a closed door. But love is not sufficient. It was never sufficient. A marriage requires 2 people who actually see each other, and for most of our marriage, I was the only one looking." She paused. "I need to know not from what you have done in the past 9 days, which was right and necessary, and I am grateful for, but from who you actually are and intend to be. I need to know whether you are capable of being present in this marriage the way I have always been present in it." The kitchen was very quiet. A fly moved somewhere near the window. Nathaniel put both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment, then looked back up at her. "No," he said. Charlotte went very still. "Not the way you have," he said. "I do not have what you have, that natural ability to see people, to know what they need before they say it, to walk through a community and understand it the way you do. I am not built that way, and I am not going to pretend I am, because you deserve better than me pretending." He held her gaze. "But I think I am capable of learning to pay attention. I think I am capable of asking questions instead of assuming. I think I am capable of reading a letter the same day it arrives instead of putting it on a pile." He paused. "I don't know if that is enough. I think that is the right question, not whether I can become you, but whether what I can actually offer is something you can build a real marriage on." Charlotte looked at him. She had expected many things from this conversation. She had not expected that specific honesty. It was not the answer of a man trying to win her back. It was the answer of a man trying to tell the truth, which was considerably more valuable and considerably more disarming. "It might be," she said carefully. "I don't know yet either." "Then we are in the same place," he said. "We have never been in the same place before," she said. "No," he said. "We haven't." The coffee sat between them cooling. Charlotte picked up her cup. Drank. It was bad coffee, genuinely bad, the kind that results from no particular skill and insufficient attention to the fire. And something about the simple awfulness of it cracked something open slightly in her chest that she had not expected. "Nathaniel," she said. "The school." He looked at her. "I put your mother's name on it because she asked me to," Charlotte said. "Not directly. She would not have asked directly, that wasn't her way. But she told me what she wished she had done, and I understood it as a request." She paused. "She was a good woman. She deserved to have something outlast her. I wanted to give her that." Nathaniel's face did something complicated that he did not try to control. "I know," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Edward told me, and I—" He stopped, tried again. "I did not know she said that to you. She never said it to me." "She didn't think you would understand it," Charlotte said. "Not cruelly, simply as the fact it was." "She was right," he said. "I wouldn't have, then." He looked at Charlotte with the particular expression of a man reckoning with the gap between who he was and who the people who loved him had quietly needed him to be. "I think I understand it now." "I think you do too," Charlotte said. And she meant it. They sat with that for a moment. Then Charlotte set down her cup and said, "I want to talk about what happens to this estate." Nathaniel straightened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for 11 years, this estate has been managed by me without title or authority or any formal recognition that I was the person doing it. The account books exist. The records exist. Anyone who looks can see what I built here." She kept her voice even and clear. "If I come back, if we try to actually repair this marriage, I will not come back as the woman who manages things without being seen to manage them. I will not come back as the furniture." She paused. "I want formal acknowledgement of my role in managing this estate. In writing. Documented with Edward Crane. Not because I need it legally, the account books speak for themselves, but because I need it to be true between us in a way that is visible and permanent." Nathaniel did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. Charlotte blinked. She had prepared for negotiation, for hesitation, for the instinctive flinch of a man being asked to make visible something he had preferred to keep invisible. "That quickly," she said. "Charlotte." He looked at her steadily. "I have spent 9 days understanding what you actually do. I have spent 9 days trying to do a fraction of it and failing consistently. The only question I have about formally acknowledging your role in managing this estate is why we did not do it 11 years ago." He paused. "The answer to that question is that I did not think to suggest it, and you did not feel you could ask for it, and both of those things were failures of this marriage that I intend to correct." He held her gaze. "Say the word, and I will ride to Edward's office this afternoon." Charlotte looked at him. She had spent 9 days outside this house. She had spent 9 days sleeping in a borrowed room and working at a borrowed desk and being cared for by people who had chosen her. And it had been unexpectedly, disarmingly, some of the most clarifying 9 days of her life. She had learned what she looked like when she was not inside someone else's definition of what she should be. She had learned that she was more than capable of standing on her own ground. She had also learned that she missed him. Not the marriage they had, she did not miss that. She missed the marriage she had believed for the first 11 years was still possible. The one where two people actually lived in the same house in the full sense of that word. She wondered, sitting at this kitchen table in the bad coffee morning, whether she was looking at the beginning of that marriage. Late. Costly. Built on the rubble of the one that had failed. She did not know. She knew she was willing to find out. "Not this afternoon," she said. "Next week. Give me until next week." "Why?" he asked. "Because I need to speak to Martha and Thomas and the others before I make any decision about returning." I will not come back to an empty house. I will not come back to a house that is empty, because the people who built their lives here were hurt by something that came out of this marriage, and I owe it to them to speak to them honestly before I decide anything." She looked at him directly. "They did not leave because I asked them to, but they left for me, and I will not make a decision that affects them without talking to them first." Nathaniel looked at her. Something moved across his face, not hurt, not resistance, something else, something that looked, if Charlotte was reading it correctly, a great deal like respect. "All right," he said. "All right. All right," he repeated. "Next week. In the meantime," he paused. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Charlotte thought about it. "Fix the coffee," she said. He stared at her. "It is genuinely terrible, Nathaniel. Whatever you have been doing to it, stop doing that." Something happened to his face that was almost not quite, but almost a smile. "I'll work on it," he said. She left an hour later. She rode back into town with her thoughts moving in the particular orderly way they moved when she had gotten through something hard and was now ready to deal with what came next. The conversation had been different than she expected. Harder in some ways, easier in others. The honesty of it had been real. She was experienced enough with Nathaniel's patterns to know the difference between his managing voice and his actual voice. And this morning, she had heard his actual voice for possibly the first time since the early months of their marriage, when they were still learning each other, and he had not yet settled into the comfortable assumption that he did not need to keep learning. She needed to find Martha. She found her at the general store in town. Martha had apparently decided that 9 days of enforced domesticity at her sister's was sufficient, and had taken it upon herself to help manage the store's backroom inventory, a task she was performing with characteristic efficiency, while the store owner looked on with the expression of a man who has discovered an unexpectedly capable ally and is not entirely sure how it happened. "Charlotte," Martha said when she saw her setting down her ledger. "How did it go?" "We talked," Charlotte said. Martha studied her face with the directness of 35 years of knowing her. "That's not nothing," she said. No, Charlotte agreed. "It's not nothing." Martha untied her apron. She had already acquired an apron somehow, and hung it on the hook near the door, and told the store owner she would return tomorrow, and she and Charlotte walked out into the summer morning. "I need to speak to everyone," Charlotte said. "Before I make any decisions, I owe them that." "No," Martha said. "I have already told them you would come." She glanced sideways at Charlotte. "I told them last week." Charlotte stopped walking. "Last week I only decided this morning." "You decided last week," Martha said calmly. "You just didn't know it yet." Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the older woman beside her with the specific exasperation that only exists between people who know each other too well for pretense. "You are infuriating," she said. "I am efficient," Martha said. "There is a difference. Come, they are expecting you at 2 o'clock. They gathered at Thomas Briggs's cousin's farm, the closest thing to a neutral gathering place they had, and they came in ones and twos over the course of the afternoon until most of the 93 were present in the yard and the barn, and spilling out into the road in the way that people gather when there is something important to be heard. Charlotte stood in the middle of them and did not make a speech. She simply told them the truth. She told them what had happened with Evelyn Harrington and the letters. She told them what Edward Crane had found. She told them that the record was now public, and their departure, their choice, had been part of what made it possible for the truth to be taken seriously, because 93 people choosing to leave was not something that could be explained away as a domestic misunderstanding. She told them she was grateful in a way she did not have words large enough for, and then she told them she was considering going back. The yard was quiet. Abigail, standing near the fence post, was the first to speak. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "Did he—" She stopped, tried again. "Is he different? Is he actually different, or is he just sorry?" Charlotte looked at her, 19 years old, asking the exact right question, with the directness of someone who has very recently learned that staying silent when you see something wrong is its own kind of cost. "I think he is beginning to be different," Charlotte said honestly. "I do not think he is finished. I do not think any of this is finished, but I think it is real." Abigail nodded slowly. Thomas Briggs was leaning against the barn wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has decided something but is giving the process room to arrive at it. "If you go back," he said, "we go back." Charlotte looked at him. "Thomas, that is not a condition," he said. "It is just the truth. If you go back to that house, we go back to that house. Because you are why it works. You were always why it worked." He looked at her steadily. "We did not leave because of him. We left for you. And if you decide to go back, that is where we belong." Silence. Then Martha, who was standing to Charlotte's left and had apparently decided that the moment had reached the point where she was permitted to weigh in. "I will say this once, and then I will not say it again." She looked around at the gathered group with the authority of a woman who has earned every syllable. "We have all watched Mrs. Whitmore build something remarkable for 11 years. We know what she is. We know what she is worth. And what happened in the past 9 days, all of it has made that known in this county in a way that cannot now be made unknown." She looked at Charlotte. "Whatever you decide, you do not go back to invisible. That is finished. The county has read the record. They know your name and your work and what was done to your letters. You do not go back to invisible." Charlotte stood in the middle of those 93 people and felt something break open in her, not painfully the way things had been breaking open all week, but cleanly, like something that has been under pressure, finally finding the release it needed. She had not cried since the morning she walked out. She had kept herself steady because there was too much to do, and falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. And she was, as she had always been, the person who made sure things held together, even when the thing falling apart was her own life. She cried now, not dramatically, not with the performed grief of someone who wants to be seen crying, just quietly with her hand pressed over her mouth and her shoulders moving, and Martha's arm coming around her from the left without a word, because Martha never needed words for the things that mattered most. Nobody said anything. They just let her. And when she was done, a few minutes no more, she straightened up and wiped her face with her sleeve and looked around at all of them. "Next week," she said. "Give me until next week." They gave her until next week. The week passed with the particular quality of time that is building toward something and knows it. Charlotte spent the days doing the practical work of a life she was preparing to move. Writing letters, organizing the charity fund transition documents with Edward Crane, so that it had the formal structure to continue operating independently of her physical presence at any one location, speaking to the women who depended on it, and making sure each one knew that the fund was permanent and documented and not going anywhere, regardless of what Charlotte decided about her own life. She visited the schoolroom on Thursday morning. She went alone early before the heat set in properly. She walked through the door of the Whitmore School and stood inside and looked at the benches and the blackboard and the small details she had added over 3 years. The alphabet painted along the top of the south wall in the careful hand of a minister's daughter who had agreed to help the small shelf of books near the door that had been donated by 4 different families after Charlotte wrote asking for them. She thought about Margaret Whitmore sitting on the back porch in her last summer pressing Charlotte's hand and talking about some days that ran out. She thought about what it meant to do the thing that needed doing, even when no one asked you to. Even when no one recognized it, even when the person most proximate to your life was too busy looking elsewhere to see it. She had done that. She had done it for 11 years, and she was not ashamed of it. She did not regret it. The school existed. The fund existed. The record in 47 families' lives of someone who showed up when it mattered existed, and it would keep existing long after this particular September's drama had faded from county memory. But she had also learned something in 9 days outside these walls. She had learned that doing the right thing in silence was not a virtue, when the silence was coerced, when it was the silence of a woman who had tried to speak and been made inaudible, who had tried to reach her husband and been intercepted, who had tried to say something is wrong and been told it could wait until tomorrow. She was done with that silence. She drove back into town and sent word to Nathaniel that she was coming Sunday morning, and that she needed him to have Edward Crane present. She also sent a separate message to Martha. 3 words. Tell them Monday. Martha received the message at her sister's house at noon on Saturday, and read it standing in the kitchen, and felt something that she would not have described as sentimental, because Martha Collins did not describe herself as sentimental. She would have described it as correct. The feeling that things were arriving where they were supposed to arrive. She sat down at the kitchen table and wrote 37 individual notes, one to each household represented in those 93 people, that said simply, Monday morning. Whitmore Estate. 7 o'clock. She sealed every one. She sent her sister's boy to deliver them. Then she made herself a cup of properly brewed tea and sat with it in the afternoon quiet and allowed herself for the length of exactly 1 cup to feel correct. Sunday morning came hot and still. Charlotte arrived at Whitmore Estate at 9 o'clock. Edward Crane arrived 10 minutes later. Nathaniel was already in the study. He had been there since 7, by the look of the lamp oil burned down. The document was prepared. Edward had drawn it up during the week, careful and thorough in the way of a man who wanted it to stand permanently and without question. It formally acknowledged Charlotte Whitmore as co-manager of Whitmore Estate, with equal authority over the household agricultural and financial operations. It documented the 11 years of work in the account books as the foundation of the estate's current position. It was Edward had told Nathaniel when he brought the draft, not a courtesy document. It was a factual record of what had always been true. Nathaniel had not changed a word. Charlotte read it at the study desk. She read it twice. She read the language carefully. She always read language carefully. It was one of the things Nathaniel was only now understanding was a skill, and not simply a habit. And when she finished, she looked up at Edward and then at Nathaniel. "It's right," she said. Edward laid it flat on the desk. Charlotte picked up the pen. She signed her name. Nathaniel signed beside hers. Edward signed as witness. And that was that. 11 years of invisible labor made visible in 3 signatures on a summer Sunday in 1817. Edward shook both their hands and left with the manner of a man who has accomplished something he is satisfied with and does not need to make a speech about. The study was quiet. Charlotte set the pen down and looked at Nathaniel across the desk. "I have one condition," she said. "Tell me." "Martha Collins runs this house," she said. "Not as a servant. As the head of household she has always actually been, with a title, a wage that reflects it, and the authority that goes with it, in writing." Nathaniel said, "I'll have Edward draft it tomorrow." Charlotte looked at him. "You keep saying yes," she said. "I keep meaning it," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, the specific measuring gaze of a woman who has been paying attention to a man for 11 years and has learned to distinguish between what he means and what he says. What she saw in his face now was not performance. It was not the managed expression of a man working to appear changed. It was something simpler and harder to fake the face of a man who had spent 9 days alone in a house that proved in every silent room and every failed coffee pot and every morning without anyone to talk to exactly what he had been taking for granted. The face of a man who had sat with that proof long enough that it had moved from his head to somewhere deeper. It was a beginning, not an ending, not a resolution, not the comfortable conclusion of a story that had been neatly resolved. A beginning. The real kind. The kind that comes not from a man deciding to do better, but from a man having been broken open enough to actually understand what better means. Charlotte stood up. "I'm going to go get my things from Eleanor Hayes," she said. "I'll be back before supper." Nathaniel stood. "Charlotte." She stopped at the door. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back. For—" he stopped, started again. "For not giving up on the possibility of this, when you had every right to." Charlotte looked at him. She thought about 11 years. About the winter of 14 and the flood and 6 letters in a locked box and a school named for a woman who ran out of some days. She thought about 93 people packing their things in the early morning without being asked, because they knew without a single word from her where they stood. She thought about what it had cost her to be seen, and what it was worth. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me in a year." She left. She rode back into town, and she collected her things from Eleanor Hayes's guest room, the room that had been kind to her, the borrowed space that had given her 9 days to become someone she recognized, and she thanked Eleanor with the genuine warmth of a woman who understands what it means to be held by someone who owes you nothing. Eleanor hugged her once firmly, the way women hug when they mean it. "Come for supper Thursday," she said. "We will," Charlotte said. She rode back to Whitmore Estate. The next morning at 7 o'clock, Thomas Briggs came up the main drive first alone, ahead of the others, the way he always did, things arriving early to make sure the ground was solid before he let people walk on it. He came to the back entrance, the working entrance, the one that opened into the stable yard, and Nathaniel was there. They looked at each other. "Thomas," Nathaniel said. "Mr. Whitmore," Thomas said. A pause. "I owe you an apology," Nathaniel said, "for not listening when Charlotte brought me your concerns. That was a failure of my responsibility to this household and to you personally." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir," he said. "It was." "I am asking you to come back," Nathaniel said. "Not as a favor to me, because you are the best man I know for this work, and this estate is not what it should be without you." Another pause. Thomas looked at him with the particular assessment of a man who does not make decisions lightly or reverse them easily. "I'll start Monday," he said. Behind him, coming up the drive in ones and twos, the others began to arrive. Martha Collins came through the front entrance. She was always the front entrance. She had been the front entrance for 35 years, and she was not going to change that now. And she walked into the hall, and she stood in the space she had managed for most of her adult life, and she looked around it with the calm, practical gaze of a woman taking stock. Nathaniel met her in the hall. He held out a document. She took it, read it again. Head of household. The words were there, formal and documented and real. Martha Collins looked up at Nathaniel Whitmore, a man she had known since he was 4 years old, a man she had served and occasionally despaired of, and never stopped caring about a man who had in the space of 9 days done the hard and unglamorous work of actually becoming accountable for himself. "About time," she said. She went to the kitchen. By 8 o'clock, the house was alive again. Not the performing alive of a great estate on display, but the real alive, the sound of people moving through their work, the smell of a proper breakfast being made by someone who knew what they were doing, the low conversation of workers in the yard and the stable, the ordinary human noise of a household that knows itself. Charlotte stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to all of it, and felt it settle around her like something that had always fit, except that now she was wearing it differently. Not as the woman who held everything together without being seen, but as the woman who held everything together and was known to do so, and would be known from this day forward in every document and record and conversation in this county as exactly who she had always been. Nathaniel came and stood beside her. He did not say anything. He simply stood there in the kitchen doorway, listening to the sound of his house coming back to life. And he had the good sense, possibly for the first time in his adult life, to understand that the life he was listening to was not his alone. It was theirs. And they had both paid dearly enough for it that neither of them was going to take that for granted again. Charlotte had built something in the silence that no one had asked her to build, had kept it running through 11 years of being invisible, had survived the deliberate dismantling of her voice, and had walked back through the door. Not because she had forgiven everything or forgotten anything, but because she understood her own worth too clearly now to walk away from the life she had built simply because someone had tried to take it from her. She had not come back for Nathaniel. She had come back for herself. And for the first time in 11 years, that was enough.